India, a land of rich cultural heritage. Its people steeped in traditions of ancient and diverse faiths. Indian life, Indian art, and perhaps most of all, Indian architecture display the diverse panoply of significant and powerful symbols, expressive of the innermost life of the spirit of man. Symbols that unite man with his creator. Symbols that have often separated him from his fellow man. Years ago, Shah Akbar, the greatest of the Mughal emperors, from his magnificent palace near Agra, dreamed of uniting all the diverse people of India under the banner of one universal faith. Well, I dreamed that stone by stone, I reared a sacred fane, a temple, neither pagode, mosque, nor church, but loftier, simpler, always open-doored to every breath from heaven. And truth and peace and love and justice came and dwelt therein. But such a goal remained far beyond the reach of even the most powerful emperor. In 1880, Jamal Effendi sailed to Bombay, bringing the Bahai faith, the teachings of Baha'u'llah, to the Indian subcontinent. The Bahai faith, newest of the world's major religions, proclaimed the underlying spiritual unity of the diverse peoples and religions of humankind, the impending fulfillment of Akbar's dream, a truly universal religion. Through the next 100 years, the Bahai community grew, developing the foundations of religious unity. The young Bahai community longed to build a unique temple that all the people of India could recognize as their own. After a century of germination, a remarkable lotus-shaped temple has blossomed in the heart of India. Attracting more than 2 million visitors a year, rivaling the Eiffel Tower and the Taj Mahal, the new temple welcomes people of all races, all religions, all cultures, and all classes. It is the Bahai House of Worship, Mashriq al-Askar, the dawning place of the mention of God. It is an achievement of the human spirit, marking the conclusion of the first century of the Bahai faith in the Indian subcontinent. A new embodiment of an ancient symbol, this remarkable structure has been widely hailed as one of the most outstanding architectural achievements of this generation. The Times of London called it the Taj Mahal of the 20th century. Its design is a unique blend of today's most advanced technologies with traditional craftsmanship. In its structure is the labor and commitment of the people of India. In its concept is a unity embodied in a symbol that lies at the heart of India's spiritual heritage, the lotus flower. The temple itself reflects qualities of the community that built it. Followers of Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, prophet founder of the Bahai faith. In just over a century, this young faith has spread throughout the planet, reconciling ancient religious beliefs with the knowledge and needs of today, proclaiming the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, the oneness of all humanity. The beginnings of the temple project go back to 1921, when the young Indian Baha'i community petitioned Abdu'l-Baha for permission to build a house of worship in Bombay. Abdu'l-Baha replied, "By the will of God, a majestic Mashrikal Azkar will be erected in one of the central cities of India in the future." Eventually, a site was chosen near the southern edge of New Delhi. From the beginning, the project was infused with a spirit of generosity and sacrifice. Ardashir Rostampur, a coffee shop owner in Hyderabad, donated his entire life savings to purchase the land. It was later discovered that the land was part of an ancient village named Bahapur, which means the abode of Baha. In 1974, the world governing body of the Baha'i faith, the Universal House of Justice, called for designs for the first Baha'i temple of the Indian subcontinent. 28-year-old architect Farabor Safa traveled to India in search of inspiration for such a monumental project.
I began traveling without any preconception, searching for ideas. I visited many places all over India, not for architectural research, but to search for a concept. I was hoping to discover some secret, to find the spiritual guidance. Symbolism has great significance in India, probably more than anywhere else I know. Everything has meaning, and every symbol speaks in a way to the hearts of the people. In a small city of India, I met a man, an ordinary Baha'i, who was here that I am going to design about the temple and this. So he came to me, and he was curious about what I'm going to do and all of these things. And then for the first time, he mentioned to me the Lotus. I was impressed by his enthusiasm, but the concept itself did not attract me. Yet, as I returned to travel, everywhere I went, I saw the Lotus in front of me. I could not escape from this concept. I was seeing it everywhere.
The lotus, perhaps the most ancient religious symbol in this ancient land, springing from the beginning which hath no beginning. The early Vedas state that this blossom was born of the light of the constellations. Ancient Brahmanic myths identify the lotus as the first living thing to emerge from the primordial sea, the starting point for the evolution of all created things. In the Hindu epic poem, the Mahabharata, the creator Brahma is described as having sprung from the lotus that grew out of Lord Vishnu's navel. According to Buddhist traditions, the Bodhisattva was born from a lotus and is often portrayed seated upon a lotus pedestal, holding a lotus in his hand. Variations on this theme are common not only throughout India, but abroad from Java to Tibet, from China and Japan to Central Asia. It is a symbol of the universal Buddha, Maitreya, a sign of the manifestation of God. Buddhists glorify him in their prayers. O Mani Padme Hum, yea, O jewel in the lotus. The lotus also finds expression in Zoroastrian, Christian, and Islamic traditions. Now, the lotus came to be embodied in the bold and creative design for the Baha'i temple.
All the people in all the religions, they have accepted lotus as a unique symbol of spirituality, purity, and it represents the messengers of God.
Mr. Sahba's drawings describe a remarkable structure. 3 rows of 9 petals, each spring from a podium, which elevates the building above the surrounding plain. The first 2 rows curve inward, embracing the inner dome, rising to 34 meters. The middle set of petals reaches more than 22 meters, some 70 feet into the air. The third layer curves outward to form canopies over the 9 entrances. The diameter across the entrance petals is 70 meters, 230 feet. The main load of the building is borne by 9 large archways, which frame the central auditorium. The main building is surrounded by 9 pools of water, whose shape suggests the floating leaves of the lotus. The central circular auditorium seats 1,200 people with the ability to accommodate an additional 1,000. The entire superstructure functions as a series of skylights, allowing light into the central hall the same way light passes through the petals of a lotus flower. The new temple in India joins the distinguished company of Baha'i houses of worship on every continent. All share certain design elements: a 9-sided structure, a central dome, interiors bathed in natural light, symbolic of unity and the light of divine guidance. Yet each is unique, expressive of the cultural heritage of its own area. Mr. Sapa's breathtaking design was readily accepted, but his unusual concept presented a formidable engineering problem. How do you create a large, structurally sound building that still captures the delicate natural form of the lotus? To tackle the problem of structural design, Mr. Sapa chose the Flint & Neal Partnership of London as structural consultants.
The most important aspect of the development of the design was hinged on the use of modern computing techniques. In 1978, when Mr. Saba and we first got together, that we had a new generation of computer software, which was vastly more powerful than anything we'd had before.
The architectural and engineering teams worked closely together over an 18-month period. Consultation helped them achieve unity between the design and structural requirements. The final design was almost identical to the architect's original drawings. Bold and daring. A lattice of thin concrete shells without supporting beams. Delicate. Like an eggshell, drawing strength almost totally from their shape. Freestanding petals. Complex curves and arches. Utterly impossible to build without the most advanced technology. Yet Indian construction techniques are labor-intensive, with minimal equipment and time-worn methods. A leading British architect commented at the time, "To build such a structure in Europe would be extremely difficult. In India, impossible." At the site, work began early in 1978. Mr. Sapa shifted his office from London to assemble the construction team, assuming the additional role of project manager. The project recruited up to 800 people, most of whom would live at the site over much of the next 6 years. In an unprecedented move, the project established a school providing education and childcare so parents could work nearby without anxiety. The workers came from all parts of India, people of different regions, different languages, different faiths. Women workers removed hundreds of tons of earth and rock from the extensive excavations and carried the concrete from much of the structure. Each woman walked an estimated 21 kilometers per day, carrying as much as 20 tons of material in an 8-hour shift. Once the basement and podium were constructed, the 9 massive supporting arches were completed. Then the extraordinary process of creating the shells began. Construction of a shell structure of such size and complexity had never been attempted anywhere in the world, and many engineers considered it a practical impossibility. Architect, designers, and contractors' engineers conducted months of research and experimentation to find innovative approaches and develop workable new building techniques. Experimental models were built out of timber. Patterns were created for the formwork that would shape the cement petals. New concreting techniques had to be developed. For aesthetic and structural reasons, Mr. Safa was determined to avoid construction joints in the shells. This required finding a way to pour the thin 13-centimeter shells up to 22 meters high in one continuous operation. This was more than 10 times the maximum height of pour recommended by the consultants. Pouring to such heights and compacting concrete in the narrow forms, which for some shells was no more than 7 centimeters wide and curved in two directions, posed the most formidable challenge. Months of consultation finally produced a complex plan requiring the precise coordination of some 300 workers at a time, working rapidly, precisely, and continuously for periods of up to 48 hours. In preparation, thousands of square feet of formwork were painstakingly laid out on precise geometric coordinates and fixed to a specially designed steel space frame. The outer formwork was then systematically numbered for reassembly and removed. The inner formwork, built to furniture makers' standards, was precisely aligned and sealed. The cage of galvanized reinforcement was carefully fixed in place. As concreting commenced, the outer formwork was put in position one row at a time. To compact the concrete, needle vibrators were threaded into pre-planned positions by workers standing on platforms 10 meters above the pouring level. As soon as the concrete reached the level of the outer formwork, the masons and concrete teams stepped back, and the carpenters rushed forward to fix the next level of the outer formwork. They had only 10 minutes to complete the task, lest the concrete begin to set. A supervisory team then quickly double-checked the reinforcement and forms placement, and the next level of pouring immediately began, repeating the entire cycle, step by step. With the coordinated efforts of hundreds of hands, the delicate concrete petals grew skyward. Meanwhile, teams of workers were systematically pouring over the steel frame, tightening any nuts worked loose by the constant vibration. This complex operation had to proceed flawlessly and without interruption through multiple shift changes. In spite of scorching heat, torrential monsoon rains, high winds, equipment breakdowns, and frequent power outages.
You can say 300 people are working at a time on these platforms, and they talk in 10 different languages. We came together and we worked like absolute members of one family. Working because you are living together, you are working around the clock. And every night, this concreting of these shells has been done in one piece, one go. 48 hours has taken to complete one of these shells.
The entire structure and scaffolding had to be covered with heavy tarpaulins to protect it from heat and heavy monsoon rains. To keep the concrete mix cool enough to set properly in the intense summer heat of central India, tons of ice were crushed by hand each day and added to the mix. The hundreds of workers developed a spirit of reverence about their work. Arriving workers often performed a brief puja or prayer before beginning their work. Together with the tons of dolomite aggregate and pure white silica sand, these workers poured something of the soul of India into the structure. As the shells were completed, the pattern of the lotus began to emerge. The inner leaves in groups of 3, the outer and entrance leaves in proper sequence to maintain an even loading on the structure. Once the outer and entrance petals were completed, work began on the final and most difficult part of the construction, the inner petals of the interior dome, a delicate lattice of 9 intersecting shells just 7 centimeters thick. With every step, every process, every day, the work of these hundreds of men and women met world-class standards. The inner surfaces were bush-hammered by some 100 workers harnessed to platforms at dangerous heights, removing a thin layer of concrete to expose the aggregate.
One can say easily its entire project is a handicraft because of the all the items which have been done with the help of people that they are really craftsmen, like 400 carpenters at a time making 40,000 square meter of formwork, something like this, or bush hammering of hundreds of, you can say near about 9,000 square meter bush hammering with the help of chisel and sort of just a small hammer and chisel by hand. This sort of work, that feeling was developed outside, that everybody has something to contribute. And that was the spirit of teamwork that could really do this job in India.
This spirit of unity, transcending culture, race, language, and faith, was critical to the project during the long years of construction. The external structure was covered with Grecian marble from Mount Pentelicon, the same marble used on the Parthenon of ancient Athens and the monumental buildings at the Bahai World Center. In Chiampo, Italy, some of the world's finest marble artisans shaped the curved marble covering. Using full-scale mock-ups and computer-controlled saws, the Italian craftsmen labored for 2.5 years to mold the marble to the subtle, elegant lines of the lotus. The marble was suspended over the concrete shells by stainless steel anchors, a cladding system never before used in India. More than 10,000 pieces of curved marble, each of a different size, had to be fitted together like the pieces of a giant three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. The challenge of the project produced story after moving story of great personal sacrifice, as Baha'is from throughout India, Baha'is from throughout the world often gave whatever they had to help the work proceed. In Iran, hundreds of Baha'is imprisoned for their allegiance to this gentle faith worked within the prison walls in order to be able to make their contribution to the temple project. To them was to go the honor of contributing the crowning jewel in the temple. On December 22nd, 1986, just 2 days before the final dedication, this centerpiece, bearing a calligraphic rendering symbolizing the unity of God, the unity of all religions, and the unity of all mankind, the name of Baha'u'llah was set like a precious jewel in the heart of the lotus. For Baha'is, such sacrificial acts evoke memories of the suffering of Baha'u'llah. A small cachet containing dust gathered from his shrine was cemented beneath the marble above the majestic archway facing the Holy Land. According to the teachings of Baha'u'llah, faith must be expressed in selfless deeds. For the Baha'i community, the completed temple stands as a witness to the spiritual oneness of all religions and to their commitment to build a peaceful and united world. Some 10,000 Baha'is from more than 70 countries flocked to the dedication ceremonies to inhale the fragrance of the lotus and celebrate their achievement. Ravi Shankar, India's world-renowned musical genius, composed music for the dedication. Architectural critics acclaimed it to be a major achievement, one of the most outstanding contemporary structures in the world, one of the most remarkable achievements of our time, as one of the masterpieces of the 20th century. Yet perhaps the most important reactions came not from the experts, but from the multitude of people of every religion, every race, and every nation who come to visit. Thousands come every day, drawn by the beauty, drawn as if by an invisible spirit, drawn to prayer and meditation.
अब्दुल-बाहा के संग्रह लेखों से अध्याय 7। मैं सत्य कहता हूँ कि
the utterance of God is a lamp, whose light is these words. Ye are the fruits of one tree, and the leaves of one branch. So powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth.
Mashriq al-Asqar, the dawning place of the mention of God, the lotus of Baha'u'llah.
The earth is but one country. Everywhere you go these days, people seem to be asking, what is the world coming to? We believe it's coming to unity.
This is an unofficial report commissioned by the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. This report is prepared with the assistance of the Consultants Committee with 152 members from 58 countries, published in 1972.
This is the essence of all the results of the investigations and consultations of 152 learned representatives from 58 countries. Printed on the back of the book, Only One Earth, it says, "It is only in our own day that astronomers, physicists, geologists, biologists, chemists, anthropologists, ethnologists, and archaeologists have all combined in a single witness of advanced science to tell us that in every alphabet of our being, we do indeed belong to a single system, powered by a single energy, manifesting a fundamental unity under all its variations, and depending for its survival on the balance and health of the total system.
If this vision of unity, which is not a vision only, but a hard and inescapable scientific fact, can become part of the common insight of all the inhabitants of planet Earth, then we may find that beyond all our inevitable pluralisms, we can achieve just enough unity of purpose to build a human world.
Over 100 years prior to this report, Baha'u'llah prepared man for this change in the human heart when he proclaimed the oneness of mankind and made it a cardinal principle of the Baha'i faith.
Ever since the middle of the last century, when Baha'u'llah, founder of the Baha'i faith, proclaimed, "This handful of dust, the earth, is one home, let it be in unity," and "The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens," the Baha'is have been working toward that glorious goal. The United Nations, therefore, represents a significant step in the fulfillment of their aspirations and labors. Would you be surprised if you learnt that the Baha'is believe that the words in the book of Isaiah, which is now a part of the United Nations Plaza, is a prophecy about Baha'u'llah's revelation and its goal, world peace and the unity of mankind? The full verse of Isaiah reads, "And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more."
Abdu'l-Baha, the son and appointed successor of Baha'u'llah, in his tablet addressed to the International Court of Justice, The Hague, writes,
"There is not one soul whose conscience does not testify that in this day there is no more important matter in the world than that of universal peace and unity of mankind."
These words, written more than half a century ago, have never been more meaningful than now. According to the latest statistics of the United Nations, there have been 120 wars since the Second World War. 20 to 25 million people have been killed in war since that time.
$600 billion spent per year globally on arms. Most weapons are 50,000 times larger than the Hiroshima bomb. There is 6,000 times more explosive power in the world than there was in total in the Second World War. Estimated to be 800 million people in the world who are living in destitute conditions.
Well, I think before any great change, you undergo some form of suffering. And I think the degree of suffering and the amount of pain that the world is going through really either bodes for, something absolutely miraculous to happen, either a start of a new era, or, we will just move to total destruction, really.
We're not going to move towards total destruction. It's going to be that new era that we've got before us. And we've got that, splendid vision of what's going to come out in the end.
Do you know what the word is used in the Baha'i writings to describe this thing at the end? It's birth. But we're going through travail at the moment. This is this old-fashioned word, isn't it? We're going through travail. And I've come across something in the Baha'i writings which, when I read it, it shocked me, but also gave me hope. Do you mind if I say it? Will that be all right? Yeah? Baha'u'llah says, that the world is in travail, and its agitation waxeth day by day. Its face is turned towards waywardness and unbelief. Its perversity will long continue. And then he goes on to say that there shall suddenly appear that which shall cause the limbs of mankind to quake. A terror situation, perhaps. And then he says, this is the hope coming in now. He says, then will a divine standard be unfurled, and the nightingale of paradise warble its melody. So we're giving birth, travail, it's giving birth to something new and hopeful.
The discussion continues with Mr. Vivian Bartlett, teacher in design, craft and technology in Newport, Wales. Ms. Shirin Fosda, biochemical research student at the University of Liverpool. Mr. Martin Cortazzi, lecturer in education at the University of Leicester. Dr. Wendy Moman, a JP and Doctor of Political Science. Mrs. Hazel Fleming, manager of a youth training scheme in Somerset, and Mr. Joseph Foster, retired head of Department of Technology at Kendall College of Further Education.
Well, so far at least, humanity and its leaders and its statesmen haven't been able to explain or control any of the problems that we've mentioned. There have been a lot of attempts to try and solve these problems. There have been a lot of very laudable efforts at mutual tolerance, principles of international cooperation, political, economic unification, and so on. But it's not hard to see that although these are very worthy attempts, they haven't yet provided any of the answers, nor are they likely to.
I came across an analogy years ago, if I may explain it. I'm sure it clears up in my mind anyhow, this sort of transitional stage that we're going through in the consciousness of people's minds. A lady had a dream, and the dream was about one of the central figures of our faith, Abdu'l-Baha, and a swamp. And in this swamp, the mass of mankind was steadily slipping, because the sides of the swamp were very, very slippery. And around the edge of the swamp, many well-meaning people were throwing in ropes and trying to drag the people out, because, of course, logically, this is what to do. If you see somebody drowning, you throw them a lifeline, don't you? Anyhow, they were throwing these ropes in, and the people were being dragged out one by one, perhaps 2 at a time, 10 at a time. And then because of the slipperiness of the swamp itself, they fell back in, and even some of the helpers fell back in. And this situation was going on, and the swamp waters were rising, and more people were being engulfed. Anyhow, a well-wisher of mankind went up to Abdu'l-Baha, who was sitting on a little hill nearby, and said, Abdu'l-Baha, we know you as a kind and loving man who is interested in unity and harmony. Why aren't you doing something to help here? And the reply was, Abdu'l-Baha is helping. He's definitely helping. He's building a machine to drain the swamp. And I think this is the situation we have today. We want to get at the root of the cause and not the branches.
To achieve this, Baha'u'llah proclaimed to the entire human race,
Ye are the fruits of one tree, and the leaves of one branch. Let not man glory in this, that he loveth his country. Let him rather glory in this, that he loveth his kind. The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens.
Every dispensation, you know, has its own particular emphasis. Every age, every epoch has its own emphasis. Each has its own special features. Now in this dispensation, this age we're living in now, the special emphasis for this age is the oneness of mankind. Now this oneness of mankind is bringing together of all the peoples and kindreds of the world to work together in unity and harmony. I think these are the thoughts that we should try to evolve and think about now, the oneness of mankind.
I think it's what Viv said has happened. You know, the world has shrunk and become so small, so that we are now aware of all the different peoples. So we now know that we are one, that there are no differences. We now know the different ways that people live in different parts of the world. The television's brought it to us right in our front room, so we know how the people look in, you know, Tibet or in Ecuador. We know that something about their customs and how they get along in life. And so we know that they're regular people just like us, and we are all one.
Yes, well, I think that's true. When you look at the evolution of, say, transportation, very few people now haven't been somewhere else. I mean, in the old days, if you went 20 miles from where you were born, you were considered well-traveled.
As far as you could walk.
Exactly. Whereas now, you know, people take holidays abroad, they go to other places, they have different cuisines, they bring those cuisines back
Oh
to...
yes, you don't even have to travel. The food will come to you.
Oh, exactly.
Spaghetti, hamburgers,
Yeah.
goulash, chop suey. I mean, these are things which a generation ago people hadn't heard of, never mind eating.
Yes, and we're learning to appreciate the differences that people have. The fact that they eat a different food, the fact that they wear different clothes, they speak a different language. Learning to adjust to those differences, learning also to adapt some of them to ourselves, like you said, the different foods and so on, gives us a wider appreciation of people. And I also think that it gives us an insight into the fact that people really are the same. They have the same kinds of problems, and sometimes the same solutions too.
You know, when I travelled around the world, I was lucky enough to be in the merchant navy, or unlucky as the case may be. And I always thought when I went to school before that we had these maps which had lines separating one country from another, you know, red lines separating this country from that, a yellow one separating that country from this. And I went around and I saw these different countries and I was looking unconsciously for these lines. I didn't find one line separating this country from that country. You know, all the divisions seem to be in our mind. It's in the mentality, perhaps the way we've been brought up. I'm Welsh, he's English, or he's French, he's Australian, and so on. But to be aware of the consciousness of the oneness of mankind, different way of thinking. And it's marvellous to travel, perhaps through the television or...
The world has been absolutely forced towards this recognition. I mean, economically, for instance, the price of oil goes up in one country, the price of bread goes up in the baker's shop next door. You know, there's an oil spillage somewhere way out 1,000 miles in the Atlantic. I can't swim on Brighton Beach. That's right.
What you're talking about is the basic interdependence of all the peoples of the world, isn't it? It's an established fact.
Well, that's an
We're here,
economic
aren't we?
thing.
Right.
But it applies socially, it applies in terms of commerce, trade, business, finance, and also spiritually. I mean, this consciousness of the oneness of mankind is a spiritual awareness of brotherhood, which should be translated into day-to-day living as well.
So we're not talking about uniformity here, isn't it? Let's clear that aspect up. Really, when we're talking about oneness, we're not talking about the sameness of things, isn't it, you know? Because Joe is a Geordie, it doesn't mean to say that I have to be a Geordie, or Shirin comes from Malaysia, that, you know, we all have to be Malay, as the case may be. But we're all different. We've all got our different ways of looking at things according to our different cultural backgrounds and so on. And, you know, whenever anybody says unity to me, I think of differences, fantastic differences, not uniformity, not going around in the same uniform.
Yeah, we see this as being very difficult at this point in time. But in the past, when we got nations coming about, I mean, the prospect of tribes, warring tribes coming together must have been equally difficult to those people, and you know, the sort of closeness that they had couldn't have been anything compared to what we've got today. And the coming together of the states of America, North America, to form the United States really must have been, you know, much more difficult than what we've got to contend with in order to bring the nations of the world together, because, you know, science and technology have already brought us so close together, and travel and intermingling of people have brought about this consciousness of the oneness of mankind, something that, you know, perhaps the people in the United States didn't have when they were told it, or when they started to bring about this federation of states.
What we're talking about then is really coming together, coming to grips with institutions, with people, everybody amalgamating for the benefit of the whole of mankind, aren't we? That the part is contributing towards the whole. And if we can have this, a fantastic world commonwealth, where there is a commonwealth, you know, the fellow over there has perhaps not the same wealth as me, but it's common to everybody, you know, that he can have his bread and jam for breakfast or whatever it may be. He can be assured of it, and perhaps eventually we can have the best that science can offer for the least of us. Wouldn't that be fantastic?
The words of Baha'u'llah here hit me. Let your thoughts be world-embracing, rather than confined to your own selves. And this puts it in essence, you see?
There are a lot of organisations, I think, in the world today which are anti a lot of what is going on in the world. They're trying to pull down the existing world order, but they don't seem to have an answer or an idea of what they're going to put up instead. And I think that the teachings of Baha'u'llah and the answer he's given us as to how this oneness of mankind is going to be established and maintained, the idea of the world commonwealth, is something which is very important.
I think the key to it are these words of Baha'u'llah. And he's talking to the whole of mankind here, addressing mankind. He said, the tabernacle of unity has been raised. That's a lovely word, isn't it? A tabernacle of unity. You know, that a tent, or and of course it has such a holy meaning for people of a Jewish or Christian background. The tabernacle of unity has been raised. Regard ye not one another as strangers. Of one tree are ye all the fruit, and of one bough the leaves.
Now, in the same way as we've had to relinquish part of our own national sovereignty for the betterment of the world, we as individuals personally have to also relinquish part of ourselves. Now, the bit that we've got to relinquish of ourselves is prejudice. Now, this is difficult. To relinquish the prejudice about colour, race, creed, all of these things, this is what I'm talking about. That we have to give up this prejudice that we have in ourselves towards our fellow beings, so that we become truly united as individuals.
Yes, I think what you've been talking about here, Joe, is change, isn't it? It's change in the human heart, in the individual, and change in the society for nations, in their perspective, change in perspective. And I always think a lot of people are afraid of change. You know, they're afraid to change the world, to change themselves. They're afraid of what might happen. But if you think about nature, in nature, things change all the time. And you can see that it's the same for people. I mean, we're subject to those same laws of change and those laws of nature.
One sort of change we don't have to make is maybe related towards unity. Because some people think that to achieve unity, everybody's got to be the same. Of course, that means most of us are going to have to change, if that's going to happen. But of course, it needn't. You know, we don't have to, in fact, all be the same, look the same, dress the same, think the same, and so on. That would be uniformity, and that's not the Baha'i idea at all, is it? The Baha'i idea, much more, is unity in diversity. First, unity, but preserve as much diversity as possible. Maybe one way to think about this is to think of an orchestra or band. I mean, you've got lots of different instruments. You've got guitars, you've got tenor saxes, you've got percussion and other instruments. And in fact, of course, all the instruments are completely different, aren't they? And you play them in different ways. Some of them you hit, some of them you blow through, some of them you bang, and so on. And you play them with different tunes as well. You wouldn't expect all the instruments, in fact, to play the same thing, would you? No. But they can all play in coordination. They can all play a melody or dance or a tune or whatever it is. So it's this unity in diversity that we're about, not uniformity.
I think I have to just say, though, that the only thing that's missing from your analogy is that unless there's a conductor and music, those different instruments are all making just sounds. They're not making music.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got a band made up of a guitar and a drum and a trumpet, and they all just play what they like at any old interval, you haven't got music. You haven't got a tune. What you've got is just a lot of noise on the stage. You need a conductor, somebody who's the leader of the band, to say, right, you know, guitar, cue in, or whatever it is. Play your piece. And you also need the music that they can follow to know that they're all playing the same tune, otherwise you've just got a jumble of sounds.
Well, what you've got then is, by looking into having a conductor, is coming back to a teacher from God, isn't it, really? This is where Baha'u'llah comes back in on the scene, so to speak, and gives us very firmly the guidance whereby we can jolly well overcome all these disharmonious situations on the planet.
Baha'i teachings for world unity emerged clearly from the writings of Baha'u'llah, which are collected in volumes of books, in a set of principles. Whilst I'm reading some of these, see if you agree with them. The oneness of mankind, the oneness of religion, the unity of science and religion, the relinquishing of prejudices, equalization of means of existence, universal parliament, universal language, universal education, equal status for men and women, the unfettered search after truth.
Here are several of Baha'u'llah's major works, and a number of basic Baha'i books which will assist the reader wishing to secure a broader knowledge of Baha'i history and teaching. Some of them can be found in public or college libraries, and most of them can be ordered through Baha'i publishing trusts in different countries. Gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah is a representative selection. The Hidden Words and the Seven Valleys and the Four Valleys deal with man's spiritual life and the states of the soul. The Book of Certitude is indispensable for understanding Baha'i views of God, progressive revelation, and the nature of religion. The Proclamation of Baha'u'llah, a compilation of his own announcements to the kings and ecclesiastical leaders of the world, and to mankind in general, was published in 1967 to mark the centenary of the inception of that proclamation. Prayers and Meditations.
I thought of that wonderful statement of Baha'u'llah's where he mentions about the coming of age of the human race. And isn't this an aspect of maturity, that we take control of our own destiny? When we're children, we are controlled by our parents and circumstances around us. When we grow up, we start dictating in which way our future is going to go. And surely Baha'u'llah is proclaimed this coming of age of the human race.
That's interesting what you were saying there, Viv, about the maturity of mankind and the oneness of mankind, because in a way, the realization of the oneness of mankind will be the maturity of mankind. And not to realize that means that we, members of the human race, are going to stick at adolescence, which would be a pity. It would be a block. And in a way, when Baha'u'llah is talking about this realization of the oneness of mankind, he's giving us a promise and a warning. He's giving us a warning because not to bring this about is going to be to miss an opportunity for the salvation of the planet, and a promise that its realization is close at hand. And really, when we think about this, we've got to ask ourselves, well, who is Baha'u'llah? And what is the sort of transforming power which he and his teachings have, which have certainly changed us, and of course millions of others around the world.
The revelation proclaimed by Baha'u'llah, his followers believe, is divine in origin, all-embracing in scope, broad in its outlook, scientific in its method, humanitarian in its principles, and dynamic in the influence it exerts on the hearts and minds of men.
Baha'u'llah claims to be and is regarded by Baha'is as a messenger of God, just as Abraham, Moses, Zoroaster, Krishna, the Buddha, Christ, and Muhammad. Like them, he has renewed the spirit of religion, adapting it to the requirements of society in this day.
His words, addressed in 1868 to Queen Victoria, carry for all peace-loving peoples a direct significance. He writes,
"That which the Lord hath ordained as the sovereign remedy and the mightiest instrument for the healing of all the world is the union of all its peoples in one universal cause, one common faith. We desire but the good of the world and the happiness of the nations, that all nations shall become one in faith, and all men as brothers, that the bonds of affection and unity between the sons of men shall be strengthened, that diversity of religion shall cease, and differences of race be annulled. So it shall be. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come. Don't let the sun close my eyes, oh Lord. Don't let the sun close my eyes. Show me the way through the dark, oh Lord. Show me the way to paradise. Flowers growing on a barren land, water where once there was sand, shrine of gold on the mountainside, gardens of paradise. At the feast of Noah we'll not forget the release of one with no regrets, for all the years in fetters and chains, to renew the light again. Doves flying on clouds of glory, ships sailing on promised seas, thousands of martyrs making history, dying for the greater peace, dying for the most great peace.
Good evening. My talk tonight is entitled The Global Brain. And what I want to do is to focus on some of the important shifts which I see are underway in the world today. What I want to start with is this image, the image of the planet as seen from space. It's a very powerful image. For many people it's a very magic image. It's an image which conjures up feelings of wholeness, oneness, feelings of connection. It's also an image which had a very deep effect on the first astronauts who are out there in space when they first looked back and saw the planet. Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon, described it as an experience of instant global consciousness. He said, when you're up there, you're no longer an American citizen or a Russian citizen. Suddenly, all those boundaries disappear and you're a planetary citizen. And what's really interesting is that most of the astronauts came back changed from that experience. They saw that not only was it a very beautiful, magical-looking planet, but also they became increasingly aware that all was not well down there. And they came back wanting to help in some way or another. It's not the astronauts who are the only ones who are deeply affected. I think many of us, when we first saw pictures such as these, had a very deep effect on us. I just want you to think back for a moment to when you first saw pictures of these, and try, if you can, remember what sort of feelings they conjured up for you. I really believe that pictures like these are, in some senses, the spiritual symbol of our time. Now that may sound strange because we're used to spiritual symbols as being very simple things you could draw with a stick in the sand. But I think with today's technology we can actually have spiritual symbols of this sort of complexity. If you think about it, the essence of a spiritual symbol is that it's a symbol of wholeness, of oneness. And it's this wholeness which is reflected in this picture of the planet. And it symbolizes the whole ecological movement, concern about planetary resources, concern about the third world, the whole issue of peace. These are all issues of concern to the whole of humanity. Another realization which many of the astronauts got was looking back at the Earth. It looked as if maybe the whole thing was some single living organism. And that may sound strange to us, because normally we've only seen the planet from close up. Even when you're up 5 miles up in a plane, you're still seeing a very tiny part of it. And I think in some respects we've been like fleas living on an elephant. If you can imagine these fleas living on an elephant, they, being rather scientific fleas, have studied the skin, measured how deep it is, looked for the sweaty bits, found the hairy bits, generally mapped out the elephant. Then one day, one of these fleas takes this huge leap off, 50 feet away, and looks back at this thing called an elephant, and suddenly says, could it be that an elephant is actually a living organism in its own right? And I think it's very much a parallel shift that has happened to us. We've been taking this huge leap back from 50 miles to 100 miles, till eventually we see the planet in its wholeness. And the question comes, could planet Earth be a single living organism? And this is not just a vision which occurred to the astronauts. It's something which many scientists today are beginning to take quite seriously. People like Jim Lovelock in England have been looking at some of the long-term changes which have happened to the planet. One of the first things they looked at was temperature. Now, if you look at the temperature of the planet over the whole of its history, you find that it started off fairly high and cooled rapidly over the first 500 million years or so. And then once it reached that crucial range between those two dotted yellow lines, it seems to have remained steady. Now that's strange, because theoretically it should either have gone up again following the red line, or gone down a bit more following the blue line, and then gone up again. But it didn't do either of these things, it stayed constant. And what seems to have happened is that all the living systems together released the right amounts of the right sorts of gases to counteract changes in the sun's output. So the net effect was a constant temperature. Now I say that sounds strange, but it's no stranger than the fact that our own bodies sweat when we're hot, shiver when we're cold, doing exactly the same thing, maintaining the best conditions for our continued existence. Another example they've been studying is the amount of salt in the sea. Now salt, as you know, is being continually washed off the land into the sea at such a rate that every 80 million years or so it would reach its present concentration, which means over the history of the planet, the whole history of the planet, it would reach this level many times over. But again, it hasn't. It seems to be steadied out. And the only way of explaining this is that somehow the organisms in the sea absorb just the right amount of salt to keep it constant. And there's now something like 24 different examples of things like this, which shows that the planet seems to behave like some huge self-regulating system. And this is what scientists call the Gaia hypothesis, about G-A-I-A, after this lady, who is the Greek Earth Mother goddess, Gaia. Looking at it, we might imagine that the heartbeat of the Earth are days and nights. The seasons of the Earth are her breaths. The tropical rainforests are rather like livers in function. The atmosphere and the oceans are like circulatory systems. So if the Earth is a living system, a living organism in its own right, the question arises, what are we doing here? What's humanity doing here? To get some perspective on it, I want to go back and actually consider the whole of evolution. Now, according to current scientific theory, the universe started with some big bang. pure energy, light. In the beginning, there was light, something science and religion actually agree upon. Then this pure energy rapidly condensed into the first elementary particles, electrons, protons, things like that. Over time, these very simple particles began collecting together to form the first simple atoms, hydrogen, helium, which then, over millions, billions of years, began collecting together to form more complex atoms, and more complex atoms, until the whole of chemistry had evolved. The next stage was these complex atoms coming together themselves to form molecules. First simple molecules like this, an amino acid, and then, over time, forming much more complex molecules, things like this, DNA, the basis of life. These huge molecules, each containing millions of atoms, then began to collect together themselves to form the first simple living organisms, bacteria, algae, very simple organisms. Over time, these too collected together to form more complex cells, and then multicellular organisms, cells coming together to form simple organisms, sponges, corals, things like that. And then we enter the more familiar story of evolution, moving up through various creatures in the sea, until we get to fish. Now fish are very interesting in the whole story. They present a very significant stage in evolution. Because with fish, the nervous system is encased in bone, in the skull and spinal cord, which means that the nervous system, for the first time ever in evolution, was protected. And the main thrust of evolution from then on has actually been in the development of the nervous system. Clearly, as we move on up from fish, through various reptiles, mammals, our bodies have changed. We've lost our gills, our fins have changed into arms and legs. But if you look at it, the most important change is actually in terms of the nervous system. It's that which has changed the most. It has got more and more complex. Until today, we find some of the most complex nervous systems known on the planet. It's interesting, the nervous systems of dolphins and whales are much more complex than ours, which suggests they might be more intelligent. Though what they actually do with their increased capacity, we don't know. Anyway, tonight, I don't want to focus on dolphins and whales. Tonight, I want to focus on the second most complex nervous system on this planet, the human nervous system. What's fascinating about human consciousness is that it's become reflective, which means that we are able to look back upon ourselves and upon the universe. Whether we're studying a piece of wood, a leaf, or looking out at the stars, what we're really doing is being the universe studying itself. We've come on this long evolutionary journey out of the energy, out of the stars, and we've reached this crucial stage of complexity where we can look back upon the universe. So in some senses you could say that the human being is a star's way of looking at stars. And it's not only on the outer plane that this reflective nature happens. When we turn our attention inwards, whether through meditation or some other process, and start looking down towards the deeper levels of our own soul, we are again the spiritual side of the universe beginning to investigate itself. So what is the next stage of evolution? I don't think it's necessarily growing bigger brains or disappearing hands. That may be happening in the very long term, over millions of years. But I think there's another development happening which fits in with the whole logical process of evolution. And that is individual human beings beginning to link together into clusters, into groups of human beings. This picture's of a village in Denmark. What's interesting is that the pattern you see here, the way the streets are organized, is very, very similar to the way the first multicellular organisms developed in the sea. This is Sun City, Arizona. The pattern here is very similar to a growing fetus. And I think this tendency of people coming together into larger units is something we're seeing happening at a much higher level. The union of the states in the USA, the coming together of the EEC in Europe. It's a worldwide tendency. I think this is the natural drift of evolution, which is going to go on until the whole planet begins to come together and starts functioning as one single community. Now this is just the physical side of this networking. There are also deeper levels. There's a linking together of minds. Through the whole information explosion, we're beginning to connect together mentally, to exchange information wherever we are. Through the birth of things like computer networks, people are beginning to link up mind to mind. We are beginning to link mentally as well as physically. And there's a third level of linkage, which I'll look at in greater depth in a minute, which is a linking consciously, a linking at a much deeper level, a linking of soul to soul. So this I see as the next stage of evolution, humanity beginning to link together, physically, mentally and spiritually, beginning to work and function on many different levels as one single system. Now there are some interesting evolutionary parallels in the way systems have linked in the past. If we go back in evolution and look at the evolution of life from matter, it seemed to take about 10 billion atoms to produce living cells. The actual figure 10 billion doesn't have to be exact. We're talking about orders of magnitude. What this figure seems to represent is the number of units you need to gather together, the number of atoms, in order for there to be sufficient complexity for life to emerge. If we look up at the next level, the evolution of consciousness, human consciousness, out of living systems, you find it takes about the same number of nerve cells, 10 billion nerve cells in the human brain, before we get the sort of reflective consciousness characteristic of humanity. Now, if this pattern continues through evolution, it suggests that the next stage, the emergence of some planetary organization out of human consciousness, we would need something of the order of 10 billion consciousnesses on the planet. Now, in terms of numbers, we're already basically there. The human population at the moment is just approaching 5 billion, which is within the right ballpark, the right sort of size. Now, there's some interesting parallels between the way that humanity, if you like, the global brain of planet Earth, is developing, and also the way the human brain develops in the fetus. Your own brain develops somewhere between weeks 8 and 13 after conception. If you imagine yourself to be a nerve cell in your own brain, at first there was plenty of space. Then, very quickly, there was this massive population explosion of nerve cells. And if you were a nerve cell, you'd probably think, hell, this is getting dangerous. There's not enough oxygen to go round. We're going to get short of blood soon. But what happens is, suddenly, at week 13, the explosion stops. From then on, the whole process, the development of the nervous system, is the growth of complexity, the growth of connectivity between these nerve cells. I think what we are seeing is a similar process happening on the planet. We've had this massive population explosion, but it's now beginning to level out. And we're moving into the next stage, which is the linking of the human cells in this planetary brain. It's occurring through things like postal systems, telephones, computer networks, satellites. All of this is increasing the connectivity and linkage of the cells in the global brain. Now, all that I've spoken of so far, you could say is the good news. The bad news is that our rapid development is also threatening the welfare of the planet. In some respects, we seem to be like a planetary cancer. And it's interesting that if you take a photograph of a city from the air and look at the way the city spreads out into the environment, it's very reminiscent of the way a cancer grows in the body. Now this picture, it may look like LA from the air. It's not. It's actually a cancerous tissue in the human body. But just look at it. Get a feel for the structures, how they're growing. And then compare it with this. Now the similarity is more than just a simple visual parallel. If we go back and look at what causes the cancerous tendency in the individual and what causes the same tendency in society, we find that underneath are very similar principles. Looking at the individual first, an individual cell in the human body, those white squiggles in the middle are the genes, the genetic information. It's the genes that make you a single living organism rather than just a bowl of biological soup. And it's when they get disturbed, they no longer tie the system together, and individual cells become selfish, rogue cells, going off doing their own thing at the expense of the body. If we look up at the next level, the human being, the cell in society, what we see performs a parallel function to the genes is now in our own consciousness. It's that deepest level of self, what mystics might call the soul. And it's that which seems to tie us together. And when that is not experienced, when we're not in touch with that experience of the deepest level of self, we become like rogue cells, beginning to function selfishly, out of touch with the needs of the system as a whole. Now this way of functioning is what Alan Watts referred to as the skin-encapsulated ego. The idea that what's inside the skin is me, what's outside the skin is not me. Now, biologically, that's okay. We are surely unique individuals. But the point is, it's not the whole truth. It's not the fullest depth of our identity. And the danger comes when we do take it to be all that we are, our sole identity. The reason people do this is because the real self, the pure self, is actually very hard to grasp. Trying to grasp that deeper level of oneness is very much like trying to describe a hole in a piece of wood. If you ask people to describe a hole such as this, they'll start saying, well, it's a round hole. You say yes. They say it's fairly smooth and it's red. You say, hang on, the hole isn't red, the hole isn't smooth. They say, aha, the hole's black. But no, that's the background. And suddenly they're stuck. What's the hole? How do you describe the hole itself? And suddenly people realize you can't describe that. And it's almost exactly the same with our own wholeness. Wholeness with a W this time. Because it's so very hard to grasp, we tend to describe our own wholeness in terms of what surrounds it. Our many possessions. On a subtle level, the roles we play. Our social status. Subtler still and even more dangerous, our beliefs, both scientific and religious. It also turns out that much of the way we mistreat the environment comes back to the fact that we see the world as separate from ourselves. consequently, we take fairly good care, and I say fairly good care of what's inside the skin, but we don't care nearly so well for what's outside the skin. We often end up misusing the world in order to feed our own limited sense of identity. The late Gregory Bateson said something very powerful about this. He said, if this, meaning this me versus you model, if this is your estimate of your relationship to nature and you have an advanced technology, your likelihood of survival will be that of a snowball in hell. You will die either the toxic byproducts of your own hate or simply by overpopulation or overgrazing. And Bateson went on to say that if I am right, the whole of our thinking of what we are, what other people are, has got to be restructured. The most important task today is to learn to think in a new way. I would actually go a step further and say the most important task is to be in a new way, to experience, to be conscious in a new way. We need to make the shift from this, the skin-encapsulated model of the self, to this. What Gene Houston calls leaky margins. The boundaries are still there, but they're much less solid. In addition, we now see that the outside world is the same as ourselves. It is this shift of consciousness, this shift of being, which I believe underlies the next stage in the whole evolutionary process. If we just go back and briefly retrace what happened in evolution, we can see that each stage became the platform for the next stage. Thus, it will be through processes involving consciousness rather than life that we're going to see the next stage emerging. So the spearhead of evolution is now right up in there at the top, right up in there. Now, when we talk of our own inner development, we often loosely talk about it as inner evolution. I think what is very important to realize is that this really is evolution, as it is now taking place on this planet. The evolutionary phase which we are now passing through is the evolution of the consciousnesses of the billions of people on this planet. In short, evolution has now become internalized. Now, not only does this seem to be the thrust of evolution, it is also the direction in which humanity seems to be moving. If you look at what's happened in the past, the major focus of human activity until 1900 or so was agriculture. And I'm talking about the West here. The majority of human working hours was spent on the land, and that was so up until 1900, when a new curve took over: industry. From 1900 onwards, industry became the dominant use of human time. The industrial age had begun. And the industrial age continued until 1975, when a new curve took over: information processing. In terms of human activity, we are now very much in the information age. We've entered the information age much faster than anybody ever anticipated. And as you can see, the reason is the information curve is doubling very fast, every 6 years, whereas industrial growth was only doubling once every 14 years. Now there's another curve, which at the moment is so low that it seems almost insignificant. But it is also so steep that you can't really fit it in on these axes. So, if we contract the axis a bit, we can see it as that pink curve on the end. And this curve refers to the growth of what I call consciousness processing. It's a measure of the number of people involved in the development of human potentials, the development of the mind. And surveys carried out in this area suggest that the doubling time is about 3 to 4 years. And that's really significant, because it may be very small at the moment, but the way in which it's doubling suggests that by the year 2000, it will have overtaken the information curve. What we would then see is a very major shift in values, as more and more people became aligned with that deeper experience of oneness, same time letting go of their individual pettiness, and beginning to function more in tune with humanity and the planet as a whole. Now, the idea of there being deeper depths to the mind is not something new. It's the most ageless wisdom that humanity has ever had. All around the world, in all ages, you find people talking of that same basic wisdom, that same basic understanding of life and consciousness. Here I've symbolized the idea of these different teachers at different times by different colored dots. But what happened once the teacher himself had gone was that the teaching was forced to spread by word of mouth or be written down on parchment. But the means of spreading wasn't very sound. So inevitably, as it began to spread out into the environment, it also began to become distorted and absorbed by the culture of the time. Now what is happening today is something very different. The same idea is popping up again and again and again. What's particularly interesting is that as a result of the whole growth of technology and the information explosion in particular, one doesn't now have to go and sit under a Bodhi tree in India to begin to get to understand the value of enlightenment. We now have the technology to begin to communicate this vision around the planet to each other. But what, for me, is even more significant is that as it begins to spread out from all the many different centers, what now happens is that this wisdom, so to speak, meets itself coming back the other way. There's a feedback. Rather than dissolving, it builds up, leading eventually to this, a high synergy society. A society in which in many senses we become even more individual than we are now, and that I've symbolized by the people being of all different colors. This society will become even more individual, and yet at the same time become linked together at the center, at the core of our consciousness, by a planetary consciousness, a planetary awareness. And it's such a transition, which I think is really the way through the current crisis that humanity now finds itself in. If you go back and look at the Chinese symbol for crisis, Wei Qi, the first symbol means danger, beware. What's interesting is the second part means an opportunity for growth, for change, for something new. What we tend to do is get stuck on seeing crisis only as danger. This is valuable, but what is also needed at the present time is to begin to look at the opportunities inherent in the crisis. From an evolutionary point of view, crises are a challenge. They're a challenge to move on to something new, a challenge to adapt. And the current crisis is one of consciousness, of shifting from our experience of ourselves as isolated beings to experiencing ourselves as part of this much larger system. And making that shift is the challenge we are now faced with. The challenge is, can we begin to make that shift en masse? Can we, as a species, begin to come together and work as one single system? Which ultimately means, can we begin to experience that in ourselves? If we don't experience it, we're really just giving lip service to oneness. and still going out into the world with a skin encapsulated pettiness. To finish, I'd like to quote part of a very favourite poem of mine at the present time. It's from Christopher Fry's play, The Prisoner. The human heart may go the length of God. Dark and cold we may be, but this is no winter now. The frozen misery of centuries cracks, breaks, begins to move. The thunder is the thunder of the flows, the thaw, the flood, the upstart spring. Thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up to meet us everywhere, never to leave us till we take the greatest stride of soul folk ever took. Affairs are now soul-sized. The enterprise is exploration into God. But what are you waiting for? It takes so many thousand years to wake. But will you wake? For pity's sake.
In the beginning was a dispersed mass of gas and dust. That is the considered view put forward by modern science to account for the origins of our solar system. About 4,700 million years ago, our planet cooled enough for the gases to liquefy. Yet it was not until the Earth's atmosphere produced a whole range of complex chemicals that the right conditions for life evolved. Even then, it required some 500 million years before the first living cell divided into the types that originated all animal and plant life. So long before primitive man appeared, the natural world was already rich in animal and plant species with their myriad sounds, scents, and colors. Modern man only made his appearance some 100,000 years ago, a being that embodied a force different from all other natural forces. A being who could not only assess his place within the natural system, but who also had the imagination to explore it, manipulate it, and conquer it to his own design and advantage. man the hunter became man the farmer about 10,000 years ago. And in Asia Minor, the discovery of metal and the use of alloys led to the world's first industrial revolution. All great civilizations in early history were made of cities based formerly around settlements of farmers, inhabited by craftsmen, metal workers and laborers. They were governed by men of superior class and intellect. Such civilizations included Bronze Age Mesopotamia, the ancient Egyptian kingdoms ruled by the pharaohs, and Persia, the conquerors of Assyria, Babylon and Egypt, which formed a mighty and enduring empire, giving to its wide realm a single rule of law, and passed a heritage of culture to the Arab world. In all these civilizations, religion played a vital part. And in the lives of the Hebrew tribes, it was all-encompassing. In fact, the Jews saw themselves from the beginning as a special people because of their belief in Yahweh, the only God who had a covenant with his chosen people. Further west, Greece was born, the civilization which laid the foundations of later Western culture, inspired by its brilliant philosophers, poets, and its love of democratic principles. The Roman Empire, built by rulers following in the wake of tough, highly disciplined armies, brought law and order to much of Europe, built superb roads and viaducts, and constructed cities whose traces today still testify to the beauty of their architecture. In India, the religion of the people, Hinduism, had the most ancient roots of all. Buddhism soon made its appearance in India and spread to southeast China, where it helped to enrich a civilization already 1,000 years old, a civilization rich in arts, science, philosophy, and the skills of government. On the other side of the world, civilization had also been firmly established in what we now call South America, occupied by the Mayas and the Aztecs of Mexico and the Incas of Peru, with their colossal sculptured temples. However, it was with the growth of Islam spreading out from the Arabian Peninsula that civilization and religion went hand in hand as a unified movement. While Asiatic and Frankish hordes threatened to plunge the world into an age of darkness, Muslim scholars kept the flame of enlightenment burning, preserving the knowledge of ancient Greece that was to prove an inspiration to the European Renaissance of the 15th, 16th and 17th centuries. Our present-day Western civilization has been shaped and influenced by 5 major phases in history. Each phase has its own distinctive achievements and values, each sequence making for a continuous process of change and evolution. The first of these major phases was the Middle Ages, when Christendom produced over 1,000 years of unity, followed by the Renaissance, a period of reformation, when Europe acquired much of the Greek philosophy and culture, which had been guarded by the Muslims against the plundering barbarians, and reintroduced to the West by returning crusaders. The third major phase, during the 17th century, saw a new zeal for learning, an age when philosophers and scientists began to employ reason and experiment to discover the secrets of the universe. It was also an age when monarchs and leaders possessed absolute power. The age of enlightenment and liberty, between 1763 and 1870, witnessed revolutions spreading from America to reach Europe in 1789. The revolution lasted 60 years. And during this time, kings were overthrown, and the idea of equality and liberty for every man and woman became enshrined in the laws and statutes of the day in many nations. But it was not only political and ideological revolution that boiled in Europe's cauldron. The smoke of the Industrial Revolution rose up from England's green and pleasant land, and her people came in their hundreds of thousands from the fields to the factories. It was too sudden a change for any society, and it threw up immense problems of welfare. It spread quickly to the rest of Europe, and eventually laid the seeds of destruction by setting one nation against the other in fierce competition for spheres of influence, both commercial and political. The fifth phase can be identified as the emergence of the modern world from 1914 onwards. The arrival of the 20th century was greeted as the dawn of a new age, and the belief that machinery capable of mass production would transform our lives for the better. This optimism lasted a few short years before being so cruelly and finally shattered. The 1914-18 war, the war to end all wars, killed millions of people, laid waste much of Europe, embittered and bankrupted the German nation, and led to economic misery and unprecedented social unrest. It was the war that saw the rapid development of the aeroplane, accelerated the evolution of the submarine, and perfected techniques of mass slaughter. Throughout the depressing 30s, Europe edged nearer and nearer to the horrors of the Second World War, in spite of the efforts of the League of Nations. Millions of older people in the Western world would endorse the view that World War II was the most significant watershed in recent history. Its effects, social, political, economical, cultural, spiritual, and technological, have surpassed those created by any other upheaval in man's existence. Towards the end of the conflict, the most devastating weapon ever invented was unleashed, the nuclear bomb. 2 were dropped on Japanese cities to bring the war swiftly to an end. Across the victory celebrations passed a chilling shadow to darken man's hopes of a sunnier post-war world. Millions of children have now been born under that shadow, a shadow that is lengthening ominously in world affairs today. In the immediate post-war years, the developed nations began to regather their strength, and their peoples demanded, almost as a right, more and more material rewards for their labors, and technology was not slow to supply them. Television became a necessity in every home. Refrigerators, cars, and telephones were no longer the symbols of the comfortably off. Advances in medical science and welfare kept the health of nations at the highest level. But the ever-advancing tide of materialism led inevitably to the neglect of spiritual values. The adult population set a poor example for the young, who were learning that hedonism and disrespect for authority and tradition formed an exciting basis for a way of life. This decline in spiritual values has continued unabated to the present day. Disillusioned youth runs faster and faster in its frantic pursuit of new and ephemeral pleasures, whipped along by the frenzied commercialism of the pop culture. Among the older generations, material prosperity is considered a higher objective than personal fulfillment and harmonious relationships. So, in spite of the vast increase in educational opportunities, the comprehensive social welfare programs, the many liberalizing influences abroad today, the innumerable benefits of technology, and all the material comforts of life, man is not the happiest of creatures. Our tragedy is that the means are available for improving the conditions of life for the whole human race. But instead, we are faced at best by colossal problems, at worst by catastrophe, perhaps even total annihilation. We have succeeded in putting men on the moon, but disaster in our stars. Let us run through some of the problems facing mankind, all of them seemingly incapable of solution by any of its rulers, statesmen, economic experts, or men of goodwill, all apparently impervious to any doctrine, theory, or system. Let's start with environmental pollution and the squandering of non-renewable resources, which may easily upset the delicate and intricate balance of the planet's ecosystem and endanger our very biological survival. We are well on the way to destroying our own planet because there is no overriding, internationally constituted body to monitor and control the stripping away of our natural resources. In addition, we suffer pollution of land, sea, and air by aggressive competition among the world's industrial organizations. We are faced by an explosive population growth, and by the end of this century, it is estimated that the world's population will be more than 7 billion, doubling thereafter roughly every 25 years. Clearly, this has been a contributory factor to widespread poverty and hunger. About 3/4 of the human race are underfed and undernourished, and a great proportion of them are starving. In 1978, according to official sources, 12 million children died as a result of starvation. Further problems on a global scale include disease, ill health, and lack of shelter in vast areas of the Third World. Terrorism and violence. Political tyranny, resulting in atrocities against minorities and large numbers of refugees. Religious intolerance coupled to fanaticism and arrogant nationalism. The breakdown of social order, strikes, and continuous confrontation between management and labor. But perhaps most serious of all, the acceleration of the arms race between the Western and Eastern powers, with the inevitable danger of all-out nuclear war. A doom-laden catalogue indeed. Some may think these problems are exaggerated, that mankind has always faced what seemed at the time to be insuperable difficulties, and has always survived them. But can anybody honestly say that any previous period in human history has experienced problems so universal in scale and in so potentially dangerous a combination? These problems are all indicative of man's conflict with himself, with his fellow man, and with his environment. We are beyond the 11th hour and perilously close to midnight. The three major challenges facing mankind at this late hour could be how to establish universal and lasting peace, how to manage the limited resources available on our planet, how to cure the deep spiritual malaise which has spread to nearly all corners of the globe. These challenges are so closely linked and so worldwide in scope that the response must be global in execution if man is to meet them successfully. What then are the possible ways open to us in order to avoid the impending catastrophe, face the challenges effectively, and triumph over this formidable task? Let us examine the only two possible options open to mankind. The first of these is the political option. All political systems in operation today suffer from a number of flaws. For example, an overemphasis of the leader figure, a tendency to create divisions in society, and the fact that the political system is based inevitably on the national sovereign state, and therefore cannot offer worldwide solutions to daily global problems. The self-defined interests of the national power system and the welfare of mankind in general do not coincide. Indeed, in many instances, they are diametrically opposed to one another. The second option is the religious option. If man is to face up to the challenges of his age, a profound change in his attitude is essential. He must develop a willingness to regard the interests of humanity above his own immediate needs. History presents plenty of evidence that when religion is pure and vigorous, it leads man to his greatest spiritual and moral achievements. But when a religion weakens, it ceases to be a guiding force. Many of our leading thinkers believe that lack of spiritual inspiration and moral leadership, particularly in our recent past, has been an important factor in the alienation of the educated and certainly of the young. Furthermore, they have come to realize that a religion that is capable of helping man to deal with worldwide issues, that appeals to all cultural and religious backgrounds, and that provides guidance on social organization as well as on matters at an individual level, implies only one thing: that humanity is in need of a new religion which embraces all other religions within its fold. The followers of Baha'u'llah firmly believe that the Baha'i faith is that new religion. Its principal tenets of intellectual integrity, the essential unity of religions, and the basic oneness and wholeness of mankind open the door for the gathering of all the children of man as one family. They believe that the teachings of Baha'u'llah provide for a new and highly democratic system of participatory government crowned by a world assembly, and for the application of spiritual principles to social as well as individual conduct. One of its principal teachings, namely the complementary roles of science and religion, can and will be a great factor in bringing about a truly civilized world society. Let us now look a little closer at some of the claims and teachings of the Baha'i faith. Baha'i teachings stress that man, in his search for knowledge, should look to both science and religion. Science deals with the discovery of facts, with the material needs of man. Religion with his moral and spiritual requirements. Both are rational. Both are the two most potent forces affecting the destiny of man. Both are facets of the same truth. Science alone cannot provide for man's happiness and fulfillment, and religion by itself is incapable of satisfying the never-ceasing desire to discover more about himself and the universe he inhabits. Interweaving the faith of religion with the discipline of scientific inquiry could be the strongest bond between men of every race, creed, and political belief. Like many religions, Baha'i teachings recognize that although God is unknowing in his essence, the evidence of his existence is all around us to see, in nature and in man himself. Baha'u'llah says,
"Every created thing in the whole universe is but a door leading into his knowledge, a sign of his sovereignty, a revelation of his name, a symbol of his majesty, a token of his power, a means of admittance to his straight path."
It is another article of the Baha'i faith that all revealed religions are but different stages of the same faith of God, progressively proclaimed by such educators of humanity as Moses, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, and now the Bab and Baha'u'llah. There are always two aspects to the teachings of these educators. First, the universal theme that embraces love of God, love of man, justice, humility, charity, mercy, forgiveness, faithfulness, and moderation. These form the great truths of religion. Secondly, social teachings, which are given not only in response to the pressing needs of the time, but also in anticipation of the requirements of the age in which they are revealed. Baha'is believe that this principle of progressive revelation is a necessary part of the religion of God and will continue for as long as man is on this planet. Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith, states,
"Unification of the whole of mankind is the hallmark of the stage which society is now approaching. Unity of family, of tribe, of city-state, and nation have been successfully attempted and fully established. World unity is the goal towards which a harassed humanity is striving."
Baha'u'llah says,
"The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens. The fundamental purpose animating the faith of God and his religion is to safeguard the interests and promote the unity of the human race."
Abdu'l-Baha, the eldest son and successor of Baha'u'llah, has written movingly on this theme.
"Consider the flowers of a garden. Though differing in kind, color, form, and shape, yet this diversity increases the charm and adds beauty. Diversity of hues, form, and shape enriches and adorns the garden and heightens the effect thereof. In like manner, where diverse shades of thought, temperament and character are brought together under the power and influence of one central agency, the beauty and glory of human perfection will be revealed and made manifest. Naught but the celestial potency of the Word of God is capable of harmonizing divergent thoughts, sentiments, ideas, and convictions of the children of men.
Other principles of the Baha'i faith are that every man and woman should seek the truth independently, unfettered by dogma, and without preconceived ideas and notions.
That he or she must relinquish all facets of prejudice and superstition.
That a universal and compulsory education must be every man and woman's birthright.
That equal rights, privileges and opportunities should be accorded to both men and women.
That extremes of poverty and wealth should be abolished, and that solutions to economic problems are essentially spiritual in nature. That a language should be chosen from the existing languages or a new one constructed, and be taught in every school throughout the globe as an auxiliary world language to facilitate better understanding amongst the nations of the world. That the goal is world peace with all it entails. It is a recipe by any standards for the elimination of all forms of provincialism, insularities and differences, whilst still stressing the need for a true and intelligent patriotism, the retention of national cultures, and obedience to the sensible dictates of one's own government. In other words, unity in diversity. The unity of the human race, as envisaged by Baha'u'llah, implies the establishment of a world commonwealth, in which all nations are closely and permanently united, and in which the autonomy of its members of state and the personal freedom and initiative of individuals that compose them are completely safeguarded. This commonwealth must consist of a world legislature, whose members will ultimately control the entire resources of all the component nations, and will enact such laws as shall be required to regulate the life, satisfy the needs, and adjust the relationships of all races and peoples. A world executive, backed by an international force, will carry out the decisions arrived at, and will protect the organic unity of the whole Commonwealth. A world tribunal will adjudicate and deliver its compulsory and final verdict in all and any disputes that may arise between the various elements constituting this universal system. A world metropolis will act as the nerve center of a world civilization, the focus towards which the unifying forces of life will converge and from which the energizing influences will radiate. A mechanism of world intercommunication will be devised, embracing the planet, freed from national hindrances and restrictions, and functioning with swiftness and regularity. The economic resources of the planet will be organized, its raw materials will be tapped and fully utilized, its markets coordinated and developed, and the distribution of its products will be equitably regulated. The causes of religious strife will be completely abolished, and the inordinate distinction between classes will be obliterated. Destitution on the one hand and gross accumulation of ownership on the other will disappear. The enormous energy wasted on war, whether economic or political, will be directed to extend the range of human inventions and technological development, to increase material productivity and to exterminate disease. A world federal system will rule the entire planet and exercise unchallengeable authority. It will be a system in which force is made the servant of justice, whose life is sustained by its universal recognition of one God and its allegiance to one common revelation. Such is the goal towards which humanity, impelled by the unifying forces of life, is moving. Baha'is firmly believe that what this infant faith of God has already achieved provides sufficient guarantee that it will continue. In the words of Shoghi Effendi,
to forge ahead, capturing loftier heights, tearing down every obstacle, opening up new horizons, and winning still mightier victories, until its glorious mission, stretching into the dim ranges of time that lie ahead, is totally fulfilled.
Indeed, the Baha'i faith is growing rapidly throughout the world. Its teachings appeal to peoples of every country and from every background. Its message of love, unity and hope attracts followers in their thousands. People believe that man, though beset by a host of troubles, has a glorious future, and that it is the mission of every man of understanding to contribute to this future and share in its blessings. The same followers believe that the implementation of the teachings of Baha'u'llah on a world scale will see the most great peace established, when the earth will become a mirror reflecting the kingdom of God. Surely these claims warrant unbiased investigation by all intelligent people concerned with the alarming state of the world today.
Next week.